Now we're on part 3 of 6 and are continuing to tackle the first contrary view to substance dualism, namely physicalism. Now as a reminder, it is important to note that several important definitions and examples and the main argument were detailed in the first video. Therefore, for clarification on the topic at hand, please see that video. In part 2, it was argued that physicalism as a view of the mind-brain failed in its denial of mental events, namely due to 1. Physicalism's self-refutatious nature, as it simultaneously denies and appeals to preconditions of rationality, and 2. Physicalism fails to describe mental events via neurology, given that mental events and physical events are distinct via the indiscernibility of identicals. Now, here in part 3, I would like to finish my first step in this inductive argument by leveling the third and last argument against physicalism and its denial of mental events. Now, you remember that in part 1, I detailed my inductive argument as follows. Given 3 criteria of theory acceptance, basicality, naturalness, and epistemic value, and the nature of rival hypotheses, human consciousness is best explained by substance dualism. Now here, the criteria that concerns us the most is the criteria of naturalness. It'll be defined in the description, so please take a look at it. So after looking at that, hence we finally come to the third argument. Physicalism as a theory fails to account for the mental in light of the criteria of naturalness, and thus physicalism cannot be accepted. What do I mean by that? Well, let me unpack it. Given the multiple distinguishing features of mental and brain events established by the indiscernibility of identicals and our subjective experiences, physicalism as a theory fails to describe mental events. Thus, the physicalist must either continue to just stubbornly refuse mental events or locate them. However, keep in mind that physicalism contains its own unique epistemic attitude, typically some form of scientism where that's hard or soft. Also, it also contains its ideological account. Usually that's some form of Big Bang cosmology with an atomic theory with evolution mixed in there, and general ontology. However, there are certain ontological constraints that a physicalist can and cannot include via his epistemic attitude, etological account of the universe, and general ontology. For example, physicalists typically prescribe to causal closure, meaning that no physical event has a non-physical cause, and top-down causation. Such constraints, however, lead to a dilemma for the physicalist. Either they can accept phenomenal consciousness as emergent in some sort and reject causal closure, or they can retain closure and reject phenomenal consciousness on the grounds that it's epiphenomenal, but both are problematic and or unnatural. For example, if the physicalist accepts the mental as phenomenal and emergent and rejects causal closure, then this allows for 1. Non-physical causes for physical events, and 2. An unnatural phenomena, i.e. the mind, that does not fit the physicalist epistemic attitude, ideological account, and general ontology. The epiphenomenalist Jaegwon Kim argues that if a physicalist rejects causal closure, then, quote, you are ipso facto rejecting the in-principle completability of physics. That is, the possibility of a complete and comprehensive physical theory of all physical phenomena. For you would be saying that any complete explanatory theory of the physical domain must invoke non-physical causal agents. It is safe to assume that no serious physicalist could accept such a prospect. Therefore, on this horn of the dilemma, it's unnatural to accept the mind as epiphenomenal. If, on the other hand, the physicalist accepts causal closure and rejects phenomenal consciousness, then the physicalist is refusing mental events. But as already discussed in part 2, physicalism fails to describe mental events via neurology because we can establish that mental events and physical events are distinct via the indiscernibility of identicals. Thus, the only other option for the physicalist is to, again, locate human consciousness. Now, the naturalist John Searle states, quote, mental phenomena are absolutely unique compared to all other entities in that they have a special feature not possessed by other natural phenomena, namely subjectivity, which is precisely what makes mental phenomena unnatural for a naturalistic worldview. Thus, refusing the mental is unnatural because one would simply have to ignore their subjective experience as they deny their subjective experience. That's simply unnatural to our personal experience. So concisely then, if you are a physicalist, you must either refuse or locate mental events somewhere in space. But via the indiscernibility of identicals, mental events are indeed unique from other physical events and what's more, existent. Thus, the only other option left is to consider mental events as supervenient or emergent properties of the brain. However, such a move would be to abandon physicalism and accept epiphenomenalism in its stead. Thus, in light of the dilemma of the unnaturalness of the mental events given physicalism, a move to epiphenomenalism is much more appropriate given said events. If these arguments are not enough, physicalism also suffers from two universal objections, which you typically hear, namely 1, physicalism falsely rejects libertarian free will and accepts determinism, and 2, physicalism falsely rejects the idea of the unified self. However, perhaps it could be argued that my usage of physicalism has not been exact enough, and there seem to be approximately 4 different ways we could form physicalism. However, if we grant such an objection, which I would hesitate to do as I feel like my treatment of physicalism has been fair, no specific theory of physicalism escapes the arguments that I've given. So, due to time constraints, I'm not going to go into all 4 theories and forms of physicalism, but I have provided a very, very quick critique of each in the description, so please take a look at that. That's all the time I have for in this third argument. This sums up my arguments against physicalism. In the next step of the argument, I will be arguing against epiphenomenalism. Peace.